Special Covert Operations Brain Initiative.
Scooby? And wait, what did Scooby do?
Velma. Bad. Reviewing Community's latest punching bag comes in the form of HBO's Velma, and I don't think I need to introduce it at this point. Tarred and feathered all the way across YouTube, Twitter, reviewing sites, the cultural landscape has shifted, there were riots in the streets, I think. I don't know, I was asleep that day. People were rushing in droves so fast to see just how bad the show was from word of mouth that it actually broke HBO Max's record for the biggest premiere day of an original animated show. Yeah, well done guys. Let's be real, the show was already given a second season that they just hadn't revealed yet. It's a very standard practice in the industry at this point. Although this does send the message that the series is financially successful. I mean, it'll continue to be if Yellow Flash keeps bitching about it. People willingly subscribe to HBO Max just to watch this show, which is the confusing part for me, because if you want to watch something you're almost dead certain you're gonna hate, then sail the high seas with me, brother. But now people have their time wasted, their intelligence insulted, their bank accounts have less money in them. Truly, we're living in an age where the angry video game nerd had the best take of all time, but we're not ready for that conversation. On to the topic at hand, is Velma really as bad as everyone's been saying? I'd say yes. If only so I don't come off as a maniac. Yes, Velma is a very painful show to watch, but I'd hardly call it the worst thing I've ever seen. I think some of you need to watch more TV shows, frankly, especially if you're gonna sit there as a grown adult and rage bait about a show that is designed to make you angry. Velma hates men, insane delusions, like unlucky, I guess, keep bumbling. Like yeah, Velma tries to do social commentary and fails miserably at it, but maybe you should analyze why it fails instead of posting reactionary takes designed to make people angry, because at that point you're just doing what the show expects you to do. But I 100% understand the backlash. It's an incredibly unpleasant and unfunny show to sit through, and I'm willing to bet most of you have not seen the full series due to either its reputation or from deciding that you'd seen enough from the first episode. That's where I come in. I decided to watch every episode of Velma so I could get a true grasp of just how bad it is. And because YouTube keeps giving me 9 out of 10, so I gotta fix that somehow. Obviously, I don't own HBO Max, so there's only one way I can watch this series without directly supporting it. Now, for the sake of this channel, I want to say that I don't condone piracy. Let's get started. I'm gonna talk about both episodes interchangeably since they were released on the same day. I will do so for the remaining episodes too. So as most of you know, Velma is supposed to be an origin story, reimagining of Mystery Incorporated from Scooby-Doo, but presented for a more mature audience, in gigantic quotation marks there. However, the show is primarily centered on Velma, a character whose identity and sexuality has been flip-flopped so many times over the years that I'm surprised it's taken this long for a mushy teen romance story to come from this franchise. Scooby-Doo has dabbled in romance before, but it's never been the main focus. Oh yeah, the mystery elements of the show, not really a focus. It all takes a back seat as we bear witness to the, pardon my French, king awful romance and terrible jokes, but that can wait for now. I have to stress that this isn't a Scooby-Doo show. Scooby is not even here because this is a teen romance with mystery elements that borrows the likeness of the Scooby-Doo cast. And I say likeness because if we're being real here, these are not the same characters. There are no similarities between them and their more iconic counterparts, which I guess is fine since this is technically a reimagining. It's the fact that everyone in this show is a gigantic loser that makes this unpleasant to watch. I should probably get to the actual episodes now. Episode 1 introduces us to the show's characters that we then have to tolerate for the next 20 minutes. Not a single character in this show is likable or pleasant to watch, which I can tell was clearly not the intent for a good few of them. Everyone from Velma, Daphne, Fred, Not Shaggy, everyone in town, and this is because the show is absolutely addicted to having each of these characters cracking lies or making meta jabs or judgmental comments, or grilling each other for literally no reason. Imagine Tony Stark, but like every character. Disregarding how that's just every MCU film post-Guardians, this makes me want to stick a lit firework in my mouth. One character being a wisecracking jack can be entertaining. It gets a bit annoying though when everyone is doing it on the same level of, well, mean, all while being controlled not by their brains but what's in their pants. This is one of those adult shows that really wants you to know that it's an adult show. Scooby-Doo is for pussies. We have cockroaches being in the first scene. We got swearing, sex jokes, gore and violence. We open our show with a bunch of 15-year-old girls showering. Wait a second. Hollywood, you are not beating the allegations. We finally get an adult take on Scooby-Doo and they for some reason don't make the characters over 18. So the show just opens with a bunch of naked 15-year-olds fighting in the shower. Hey, no, you stay. So in the first few minutes of the show, you're already uncomfortable, and it doesn't get much better. Of course, some of the characters are written to be unlikable, but then you have Velma, the protagonist of this series, being nearly on par with these people, and it's clear that the show wants you to feel bad for or root for Velma in some capacity. The issue is that Velma is a massive bitch. It's like someone took her sassiness and just made it her entire character. If it's not a random character saying, oh, if this was a cliche TV show, this would happen, it's usually Velma doing it. They went from a character who made sarcastic and smarty remarks to a total a**hole who more often than not deserves the majority of the stuff she goes through. She just rips into anyone she talks to, even if they're being civil with her, and will often just cause problems on purpose without being provoked. Like when she just gets up and starts yelling about her missing mother during a town meeting that's being held due to a murder spree. And many of her comments and remarks that are supposed to come off as witty are just straight up mean. And that goes for every character too. It's just especially worse with Velma when the show wants you to empathize with her, and then when she starts speaking, it's like the show just stepped on a rake.
I'm not just a waitress, I'm also
A basic who doesn't even know how to use hashtags?
Yeah, really feeling that main character energy here, guys. I've also gotten plenty sick of meta jokes in recent years as they're being used as a crutch instead of a smart jab. And boy, if that isn't more evident with Velma. Half of the dialogue in the first episode is just the characters remarking about how cliche something would be if this was a TV show, then doing said thing. It's the same issue Rick and Morty now have with some of their jokes, where they'll acknowledge they're doing something stupid and then proceed to do the thing anyway. I made 2 videos about that, by the way. Or they'll just reference something and pretend they said something funny. And while the number of these jokes are toned down in later episodes, there's still a large abundance of them, and it's painfully lazy. When each character is wisecracking like no tomorrow or ripping into each other over the smallest things, it becomes unpleasant and incredibly unfunny. I thought it was weird that the usual culture war hacks were digging into Velma for being politically correct, and then the other side of the argument was getting upset at how shockingly edgy a lot of the jokes are. And not a good kind of edgy either. There's no dark humor here, it's just mean-spirited garbage. I've seen people say the show feels like a parody of what culture war people think being an SJW cartoon is, but I think it's more appropriate to acknowledge that this show just finds a way to piss off everyone, and I think we should instead unite and make fun of it for doing so poorly as opposed to tearing ourselves apart politically. Notice how I haven't talked much about the plots of the first 2 episodes so far. That's because the first 2 episodes are essentially just vehicles for the unlikable characters to deliver jokes and jabs about generic teen dramas, while having the mystery just sort of float around. As they set up Velma wanted to search for her mother, her parental issues, her strained relationship with Daphne, her friendship with not Shaggy, Fred being an entitled rich kid, and Velma's hallucinations that cause her to undergo a severe panic attack. There's a lot being set up here, and it's a total mess. And about those hallucinating panic attack things, Velma has to solve the mystery of her mother's disappearance in order to get rid of them. But another way she can quell them is by getting someone to make her laugh, I guess. And this is mainly accomplished through her best friend, low-tier god?
But I had to find you because I still don't know if you listen to my VMs, voicemails, let alone
Ostrich Fox?
Welcome back to Crystal Clear on the Roundtable. I'm Ostrich Fox, and diamonds are a girl's best friend. And pearls are a diamond's best friend.
This is not Shaggy, or Norville, which I was surprised to find out is actually Shaggy's real name. I'm surprised I didn't know that. Well, the wiki guy is spitting bars, doesn't matter either way because Norville is not Shaggy. He's the only character on the show I can tolerate though, because he's not a raging loser. He's still a loser, just not a raging one. Until episode 7, but he doesn't do enough to be likable either. On topic though, Norville is in love with Velma for the first few episodes and admits this to her when she's having a panic attack, which then causes her to laugh. Ignoring the fact that this is a horrible portrayal of a panic attack, we're still supposed to like Velma after she laughs at someone for expressing their feelings? Like, I'm not pearl clutching over this, it's just so confusing. Do you want us to like Velma or not? And no, I'm not going to use this opportunity to praise Puss in Boots 2 for getting the panic attack thing right, which I loved by the way, because that's corny and overused at this point, although you should definitely watch Puss in Boots 2 over this, it's so freaking good. It's just really poor and confusing writing. I haven't really mentioned the story, so I'll go ahead and do so. Velma is blamed for the murder of one of her classmates as the body was found in her locker and is tasked with solving the mystery to prove her innocence within 24 hours. And that's about as complicated as it gets in terms of mystery solving. Episode 1 is the most focused on that aspect of the show, but even when the show is focusing on that stuff, it's clear that it was mostly just an afterthought written by people who clearly don't don't care for it. Story beats are often rushed and thrown together, like choosing Velma's encounter with Fred to be the scene that leads into Velma's flashback with her mother. It's like two completely different scenes are just smashed together. There is no grasp on the concept of pacing in this show, it just skips along to the next scene or story beat with reckless abandon. Episode 1's plot makes sense, but it feels broken and disjointed, not helped by the poor reimagined characters. I've already talked about Velma and Norville, so let's talk about the rest of them. Daphne is a generic popular girl, so on that front she's already unlikable. She used to be friends with Velma before becoming popular, and the two frequently clash and argue and rip each other to pieces. She also deals drugs now because adult show? Oh, and the drugs are all named after Scooby-Doo catchphrases, and it's just as facepalm worthy as it sounds. If your idea of a subversive adult take on a kids franchise is equivalent to a bad Robot Chicken sketch, you may need to be incarcerated. Episode 2 has Daphne recruit Velma to help her sell in exchange for her mother's cold case file. It really is incredible how everyone in the show is just an awful person.
I spit truth without a filter, like every comedian before #MeToo.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Oh, so the reason why the character designs are so round compared to the other Scooby-Doo shows is because the dialogue is all edge and no substance. Daphne's got a whole subplot involving her missing parents going on, which is somehow a more engaging mystery than the main storyline. I use the word engaging very loosely. And it makes her a bit easier to root for as a character, but she's still not very fun to watch or listen to. There's also an entire romantic plot between her and Velma that's introduced when she kisses her during a panic attack, which first of all, don't do that. And second of all, Velma getting her cherry popped like this is not a foreign concept. It's been a popular headcanon for years and even teased at times that she might be gay. And there was one Scooby-Doo movie last year where she was just straight up confirmed as gay. And there's not anything wrong with Velma being gay, it's not something shockingly new. We know what you are. The issue is how insanely toxic and poorly handled this relationship is, given these two are constantly at each other's throats and whatnot, but that's a video for another day. Fred is possibly the most unrecognizable compared to the actual character. Fred is now a super rich, racist and misogynistic scumbag with a baby dick who's incredibly entitled and essentially a toddler. Minus the social commentary so obvious as a blue ball college student, what led you guys to make this character out of Fred? Fred's always been a super nice and friendly character, even if he does take charge a lot of the time, and he's nowhere close to being wealthy. I'm not against this kind of character being made, it just feels odd that I'm supposed to be looking at an interpretation of Fred Jones, no matter how different. Fred lands himself in a bad spot in episode 1, supposedly being behind the murders after a misunderstanding that he did not help himself with, and to prove his innocence they just make a hilarious example out of the fact that he's pretty much disabled. Good joke? Question mark. Like, Fred's an ass in the show, and this scene still feels really mean-spirited. There's not much else to talk about here, apologize if this section ends up being longer than the other episode sections, but a lot of it involves introducing the characters and it really needs to be emphasized how awful they all are before we continue. This is where most people dropped off of Velma, considering both episodes released at the same time and were both unapologetically terrible. But digging even deeper into this, I found out that it doesn't get much better and I am wasting my lifespan with this video. Why did I think this was a good idea? Episode 3 is essentially pointless and and lifeless. The point is that episode 3 doesn't offer anything of actual substance besides rushed character development. Following up on episode 2's climax where Velma and Daphne kiss, the show immediately makes a jab about how long the Scooby-Doo franchise has been giving winks and nods to the idea, meanwhile having every one of the characters emphasize how much of a huge deal it is. Something you'll notice about Velma that makes it a deeply interesting show to me is that a lot of the things it says makes it feel like the writers think they're cutting edge, but in practice they're often 5 years to sometimes 30 years out of date. It's a show that thinks it's transgressive and progressive, but in actuality is just deeply conservative and out of touch with what ideology it's actually trying to appeal to, picking off both sides of the argument and satisfying no one, because it's written by a bunch of 40-somethings whose worldview is stuck in the late 80s. It's excruciatingly painful to see this show try and do anything progressive because it fails miserably. Even the Velma being gay thing is out of date, since this was released after Trick or Treat Scooby-Doo, which was the first Scooby-Doo project to confirm that Velma was gay outright. It's also far better than Velma in every way, check it out if you haven't. Episode 3's main plot is all about Velma and Daphne, but it very quickly escalates into denial because the both of them are horrible people, with both Velma and Daphne being as sensitive as toilet paper. And we also know that Velma is attracted to Fred too, which is even more toxic and makes no sense and serves to only create a horribly written love triangle for petty conflict. It's like each scene the show is bungee jumping is the Grand Canyon without a f***ing cord. There's also some really poor self-defense training at their school being led by Daphne's mom, so that goes about as well as you expect it to. Norville attempts to give Fred therapy as a way to weasel some answers out of him, and you know, I'm not a pussy when it comes to edgy jokes, but every joke made about therapists in this episode honestly made my skin crawl. Like, constantly talking about how they only do it for money to remodel their kitchens.
Sure, but therapy isn't just a great way for therapists to remodel their kitchens.
Or taking digs at school counselors.
Your dad is a high school guidance counselor, the lowest form of therapist.
Or generally just using the profession as a way to get answers out of people in a way that you'd assume would come back to bite. But no, there's like zero consequences for this. It really is reaching for the bottom of the barrel when it comes to finding things to pick on. And I don't think having a whole episode making a mockery of therapy is a very good look when you're trying to come off as progressive at the same time. Sorta just reaffirms that a bunch of 40-somethings who grew up in the 80s are out of touch and don't take therapy or mental health seriously at all, despite how much they claim they see it as a big deal.
Mental health is no joke.
Then stop joking about it, Karen! Oh yeah, Velma just reads out Daphne's journal instead of fighting her, mocking her mental health issues, and proceeds to get kicked into a wall, which is easily the highlight of the episode for me. It's so hard to like this character or even believe that her and Daphne have a friendship/love triangle thing going on when they apologize at the end because it's so rushed and unnatural. They're just smashing rocks together hoping to create a softer sand.
Velma.
Yes, I know. Now you want to apologize to me.
God, you are such a
Honestly, I just flipped through your journal looking for sexy stuff. Bit of a snooze, IMHO.
I am so close to ending you. We also find out that Daphne is searching for her missing birth parents, and that Norville's mother has ties to the asylum, so I guess that's something to add to the pile. Sorry, it's just really hard to care about any of this when you demonstrate perfectly well that you aren't sincere. Really, episode 3 is worthless. Episode 4 is when the plot picks up again, but I again have to use a phrase very loosely, because look at how much the show actually cares about this revelation.
I just found another dead girl killed in exactly the same way as the other.
Pacing of this episode is breakneck. Like, it actually causes physical discomfort in my upper body, or I'm just having a sensory overload. Imagine having an adult murder mystery show be written by Butch Hartman. That's what this feels like. Velma has to write a list of girls likely to be murdered simply based on how hot they are. Hey, guys, do you get it? They're making commentary about people being misogynists. What a progressive statement that's never been done before. God, at least do something different with it. Technically, they do, as the episode involves Velma not trying to force her views on beauty on other people, specifically unconventional standards of beauty if people choose to be conventional, which is a surprisingly thoughtful message that we don't see much of these days, but a lot of the episode is clearly painting the obvious misogynists as obvious misogynists. So you have these two themes fighting for the top and thus becoming a confused mess. The only mildly intriguing part of this episode involves Daphne and Norville searching for her birth parents, but it goes nowhere because Norv pusses out and I guess they realized they were running out of time. I say this because it's immediately followed up on in the next episode. Oh, and Fred's just into Velma now. There's a whole subplot involving him becoming a feminist and he ends up developing a crush on Velma. That was certainly a choice. Also, Gigi, one of the popular girls, learns to be herself from Velma earlier in the episode, and that's nice, I guess. Norville then bumps into her and it starts another relationship, and do you see the problem here? This show is like pure injectable ADHD. It crams so much into one episode, half-asses all of it, lets the awful and unpleasant relationship drama overtake the entire point of the series existing, all the while spewing a barrage of insincere and just plain mean jokes as a cover for the fact that they can't write better banter than the fucking Marvel movie. This video's structure and pacing is a mess, and I'm gonna intentionally leave it that way so you can see just how much the show poisons my train of thought, and I can't explain any of this in a way that's structured because then this video would be over an hour long and I don't feel like doing that right now, so okay, let's get on to the next part. Good God, at least I can give Velma this. It's at the very least consistent. Hey, you know how Scooby isn't in this adult Scooby-Doo show because the writers are aptly described as failures on the official wiki page for Shaggy? How they couldn't find a way for him to work in an adult setting in fear of it being too goofy and kiddie? Because this cartoon is made by people who don't respect animation?
You know what 420 is, right?
Yeah. It's code for adults who still watch cartoons.
I am like one more joke away from having a low-tier god monologue and you're not gonna like it. Well, episode 6 managed to find a way for it to work, and it's a bit of a doozy. Before we get into that, I should probably mention some things that I like about this show actually, because I'm not exactly a negative person, believe it or not. ignore that. Yes, there are genuine merits to Velma that a lot of people have not given credit due to the rest of the series being so fascinatingly bad. There was effort put into it in certain departments, and I'd like to list them for the sake of not only extending this video's runtime, but to also show a more nuanced perspective. Alright, are we ready? 3, 2, 1, go. The end of episode 5 features a scene where Velma gets hit by a car, and I really enjoyed that. Okay, seriously, the show's animation is, not terrible. Out of all the things the show ended up being, I'm glad that visual eyesore is not one of them. You know, given how ugly many adult shows look. The characters aren't very expressive, but they work, and they're at least a tier above Family Guy in terms of rigid movement. The lighting during Velma's hallucinations is actually really good, and it's insane how much better the show looks when it has atmospheric and stylized lighting instead of borrowing its daytime segments from Paradise PD. It reminds me of Mystery Incorporated in a way, and I hope we're all in agreement with calling it the best Scooby-Doo show. Even in scenes with regular lighting, they still make the characters stand out with good shading, something I wish Velma did more, because unless a character is right next to a light source, they look flat as hell. Let's see, what else? No, that's really just it. It's just the visuals. I'm sorry for not offering a more well-rounded take here, but there's just nothing insanely positive I can say about the show without it seeming like I'm grasping at straws. Like, the voice performances are okay, sure. There's like 3 jokes in total that made me smile, I guess. Velma gets hit by a car. I guess we can get on to episode 5 and 6 now, which tackle both Daphne's parents, Norval's parents, Fred's parents, and Velma's parents. Is there something you want to tell us, guys? Norval and Fred don't matter besides making jokes about how Fred is still a sexist underneath the version of him that wants to be a feminist, and how Norval is rebelling against his father's beta lifestyle. That's certainly a sentence. Episode 5 is kind of just there. The only plot progression we have is Daphne and her parents, and their underground crime ring beneath an abandoned theme park. That's all there really is to talk about, unless you were somehow really invested in Velma having to feed her entire band class and they end up destroying her house. Episode 6 is where most of the details are, as Velma finds out Norval's grandmother was part of a 1970s military program, and that Velma's mother disappeared after finding her journals. This program involved finding ways to keep brains alive outside their original bodies and putting them into the bodies of meddling kids. They said it. They said the thing.
He called the program the Special Covert Operations Brain Initiative.
Oh, give me a f***ing break.
Scooby? And wait, what did Scooby do?
I was almost gonna throw in the towel here, but I persisted. Velma comes to the obvious conclusion that the removal of brains from the murder victims has something to do with this military project and her mother's disappearance. Now that we're past the introductory period, we're finally getting to see some of the character dynamics a bit more. And they're all the same. Just 2 absolute losers biting back at each other with occasional references to the ongoing love square. These characters have no chemistry together. They just shout the most vile crap at each other as if that alone makes the show funny, or makes their relationships believable. The only thing here that feels semi-real is the relationship between Norval and Gigi. But don't worry guys, he's sure gonna fumble that bag later on.
Also, for what it's worth, Daphne is technically hotter. You just have a mildly better personality.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
If you really want a mature take on Scooby-Doo, just watch Mystery Incorporated. Sure, it's kid-friendly, but it manages to be dark, tells an ongoing plot, explores and develops the main cast in ways that haven't been done prior, all while not sacrificing the core appeal and identity of Scooby-Doo. And while we're on the topic of Mystery Incorporated, did you think I was just gonna let the plagiarism slide? Daphne's entire plotline involving her birth parents being criminals that only want to use her for treasure and don't care about her is copied note for a goddamn note from Fred's plotline involving his parents in Mystery Incorporated. I am not exaggerating either. Even the reveal that their adoptive parents care about them more is the same, and even the treasure involved is the same. You got the crystal sarcophagus in Mystery Incorporated and then the crystal mines in Velma. It's legitimately note for note the one mildly interesting plotline in this whole series. And it's just straight up stolen from a better Scooby-Doo show with no shame or irony. And they somehow do it worse. For a show that constantly makes fun of classic Scooby-Doo tropes and seems to be ashamed of being a cartoon, let alone a cartoon in a franchise primarily aimed at children, I find it quite hilarious and very sad that they had to rip off a show that's far better in the same franchise that's aimed at children. Guys, just watch Mystery Incorporated instead of this, I'm begging you. It's also funnier because it has to tell jokes in a way that appeals to both kids and adults, instead of just just being given unrestrained freedom of what jokes they can make and only going for the most crass and generic kinds of adult humor. You know why I can find more enjoyment in DuckTales compared to adult cartoons? Because the writing is actually smart. The jokes are told within the realms of kid-friendly restrictions, so they have to be clever with their humor in order to appeal to every kind of viewer. Whenever an adult cartoon is made, especially if it's a new interpretation of a kid-friendly franchise, they tend to only go for jokes aimed at adults, and it ends up being more lazy and less mature than if they just toned it down and went for a more general audience. That's not to say adult humor is not funny, that's just a lie, but there's more to appealing to an adult audience than constant references and being a dick. Velma's father is not a good character, but there was clearly an attempt at showing them bonding again, and I can appreciate that even if it's rushed.
Jinkies!
Okay, now you're totally trying to make it a thing.
Your life serves zero purpose. Overall, episodes 5 and 6 are still on the same level of bad as previous episodes, but surprisingly, and I know this is gonna sound like heresy, but the show gets better? Well, alright everybody, we're almost there, home stretch. God, I wish I drank. Now, while these episodes aren't exactly good, I will say that they are leagues above the first 6 episodes. For starters, episode 7 has actual jokes. And what's crazy is that most of them are actually funny. Like, yeah, the episode does get wrapped up in dated social commentary about how men have it way easier than women, and they pile on that joke for so long it becomes corny. But the majority of the jokes aren't references, nor are they trying too hard to appeal to adults while still having a mature edge to them. They're not gonna blow anyone's minds or make people start howling with laughter, but I was surprised there were mere line reads in this episode that made me chuckle. And while the characters are still thoroughly unlikable, they use that opportunity to actually do decent gags about how awful they are instead of the joke just being, hey, watch this character do something terrible, are you laughing yet? You feeling that main character energy? As much as I find Norval incredibly bland and really don't vibe with Fred being the rich white douchebag, there's a bit more effort going into the gags surrounding their actions now. And again, this is all personal taste and there are still plenty of groaners in this episode, but it's necessary for me to give a more balanced view of things when I notice them, even when I can just chalk it up to personal preference. And while the rest of the show has this underlying resentment for the franchise it's attached to, and makes a load of cynical and jaded jokes making fun of the franchise's tropes, the final few minutes of this episode goes for an old-fashioned tribute to the iconic Scooby-Doo chase sequences that I honestly found rather enjoyable. They make use of and make fun of the franchise's long-running tropes in ways that aren't cynical or jaded or painfully unfunny or lead to some sort of joke. The door sequence with Norval and Fred specifically was infinitely more entertaining than the previous 6 episodes. As for the plot though, both 7 and 8 still suck with that in mind. Velma goes undercover as a guy to a festival and the entire time is just reaping the benefits of being a guy, and it's not really groundbreaking or smart commentary. This exact idea has been done plenty of times. It's not profound or funny. Velma and Daphne make amends after Velma ignored her several times in the last episode and Velma vows to focus more on her when the mystery is solved. It's so hard to care about this relationship when it's been broken apart and put back together so many times now. Character consistency is a frequent failure here. Like when Daphne gets upset over a misunderstanding from Fred when she thought he said something lewd, when in the very first episode she's upset she can't get him to take his pants off for her. And also, these characters are 15, you f***ing degenerates. By the way, I don't think having Velma be stuck on figuring out the meaning behind Jinkies is as smart as the writers thought it was, especially when it's clear that they really don't care about the mystery aside from just making it make basic sense. But that's the bare necessities of a mystery, and unless you're doing an explicit parody, you do not write mysteries like this, especially when you have several scenes of Velma taking it seriously. Episode 8 is, okay, not as good. The constant relationship drama is just soul draining. I swear if the show ends up going for as long as other adult shows, the number of times Velma will screw up and then reconnect with Daphne will start to rival US citizens. The pacing and self-aware jokes are at their absolute worst here.
You going from Daphne to Velma is worse than going from a beloved cartoon to a playful reimagining.
Guys, it's funny because they're aware of how bad the show is. Oh, they also found another way to put Scooby into this adult show, by the way. Okay, that one there was a violation. I personally wouldn't take that.
I'm coming after you.
Yeah, and I'll give you a Scooby smack.
Then there's this weird fascination with making fun of jump cuts and flashbacks, and going into long-winded explanations of what they are and why they're aware of how cliche they are. Like this scene is literally 30 seconds of them talking about flashbacks. It gets very tiring very quickly. This is bottom of the nutsack meta humor. It's not subversive or clever or pretending to be clever. It's just a way to fill in the episode runtime, which they could have done for a very specific moment later in the episode to make it less rushed, but we'll get there. there. Then they throw in some random factoid about Daphne being obsessed with Gigi, which is relevant for about 15 seconds. Also, Fred finds the brains of the dead girls in this underground bunker, and Norville horrendously bumbles.
Also, for what it's worth, Daphne is technically hotter, you just have a mildly better personality.
Oh, brother!
Unlucky, keep bumbling motherfucker. Like you just had to go and make the one character everyone tolerated a complete douche, didn't you? It's so strange because the show is now seemingly aware of how awful Velma is as a person, yet they still want you to like her and be engaged with whatever she's doing. I don't get it, it's super bizarre.
We were both too messed up to be friends. It's clearly not working.
Maybe it's time we try being girlfriends.
Well, that's not toxic at all. If you want more proof that the show is more concerned with writing its terrible relationship drama and it's just on autopilot, here's Velma's mother, guys! She's just here! And she wasn't even here a second ago! Yippee! Velma found her mother and there was barely a coherent mystery behind her disappearance. Like legit, she just shows up out of nowhere, since the segments where she could have been built up were instead used to make awful jokes about Fred still being a massive sexist. So she just appears and saves the day, bringing the mystery machine into the show, finally, but God. Just when I thought the show was gonna actually start trying with its jokes at the very least, I get slapped with arguably the worst jokes they've made since episode 2, and the worst storytelling and character work. I'm starting to see why this show is treated like the worst thing ever made. It really sucks. It's obviously not the worst thing ever made, but never have I watched a show fail at fundamentals this confidently. Well, we're nearing the end, thankfully. I'm happy to get paid for this, finally. Okay, here's the one joke I laughed at.
Oh, phew.
Yeah, that's it. The rest of this sucks ass. Glad they're finally giving Velma some honest-to-God consequences for being the worst person alive by having her lose Norville and so many others in one episode, but that doesn't change the problem. Velma is still portrayed as sympathetic and by the end of episode 10 has learned literally nothing and acts the same as usual, so meh. They keep introducing new and exciting ways to break up Velma and Daphne only to throw them back together, and the ending throwing Norville back into the mix because Velma slipped up and said she loved him made it feel even worse. Granted, Norville is back to being the only character I can actually sorta root for, and I heavily related to him trying to stay as far away from Velma as possible because that's what I'm gonna do when this video is done. They really ramp up the Scooby-Doo references and meta jokes too. Everything from making fun of the flowers on the mystery machine and low-key calling the mystery gang files.
Nothing's trashier or more pedo-tinged than teens in an old van.
And this is all without even mentioning the horrendous story that completely falls apart. One thing I'll give to Velma is that episodes 1 through 8 at least told a story that made sense despite the miserable storytelling skills on display. Here though, it's a mad dash towards the finish line with Velma's mom supposedly having amnesia, meaning Velma has to spend the whole episode crossing boundaries with everyone she knows to avoid upsetting her, which will for some reason cause her memories to fade away after 3 days. Now, I'm no doctor, but and because dialogue is hard to write, she explains away her father's affair with a newborn child by throwing Norville into the mix and saying she had a baby with him. And after falsely accusing his father of being the killer, she refuses to own up to anything and it's the last straw.
You should absolutely place the blame where it's due. The police.
You serve zero purpose. You should kill yourself now.
This show is such a melting pot of shit. I'm running out of things to say about it, but that's not the only thing running.
Just say who the serial killer is.
Of course. It's me.
Because there goes the plot, running off a cliff. Setting up Velma's mom to be the killer, which I'm shocked it wasn't pieced together by anyone on the show when you consider the evidence, but apparently she was hypnotized, which connects back to the person Norville's grandmother worked with back in the 70s, and the watches themselves were manufactured by Jones Gentleman's Accessories, meaning Fred's mom is behind the killings. I will say they did a decent bit of misdirection, making me think Fred's dad would be the killer, but this is still an insanely lame twist. Scooby-Doo having a serialized mystery spanning a whole season is surprisingly rare when you think about it. So letting the audience do literally no mystery solving is kind of a massive L. Characters just do their own thing for 10 minutes and then suddenly they have like 10 clues at once and immediately piece everything together. That works for episodic Scooby-Doo shows, not an adult one that's trying to tell a serialized plot. Again, Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated called They Want Their Identity Back. Fred's mom wanted to replicate Norville's grandmother's methods, say that 3 times fast, so she can replace Fred's brain with that of someone more competent, that being Daphne in this case, so they can run the company instead. instead. There's some forced bonding, obligatory meddling kids, and then Norval obliterates her Hot Fuzz style, and everyone becomes town heroes on a dime. And of course they all still hate each other because these kids are awful people who aren't fun to watch. Velma disowns her father, who she's literally mended ties with, and then the episode ends with a teaser for the next season that you know is gonna happen, blah 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 blah. There's also another shower scene because HBO doesn't want me to make any money today, and that's Velma. That's about as comprehensive as I can make it because never ever felt like my brain was being numbed by a frying pan for 40 minutes. Velma holds no eggs in its basket because they're all smothered on the goddamn floor. Nothing feels right, everything is too quick, too cynical, too jaded, and I simply can't be bothered to care nor feel the need to write any more than I need to for this section. It really is such a horrendous finale that knows what it's doing, but loses itself in execution like a baby learning to draw. Apologies for rushing this ending, that's probably subconscious meta-commentary there, but there's no way I can go into this show in depth because its failures are so obvious. The relationships are fake and contrived, the characters are insufferable, the handicapped story is held together by duct tape, and the less I say about Velma herself, the better. Velma is not the worst show I've ever seen, but it's a consistently and confidently terrible show that exemplifies everything wrong with adult animation. The jokes are too mean, too crass to make a grown adult laugh, and real laughs are so incredibly scarce you wonder if they were just written on accident. It takes the characters people have loved for decades and doesn't just try to deconstruct them, it rewrites them into some of the most unpleasant assholes I've ever seen fill the roles of protagonists. The meta-commentary and reference jokes are repeatedly some of the show's most tragic misfires, with no energy in their delivery nor reason for them to be spoken by a seemingly human person. The social commentary is often years to decades out of date and shows how horribly out of touch the writers of the show are of their worldviews and what they consider to be progressive, meanwhile frequently stepping over the line into being borderline offensive for no reason. Despite what I'm saying, I'm not against the concept of an adult take on Scooby-Doo. Hell, I love that idea. There are so many places you can take Scooby-Doo as a franchise because it's just that flexible. And I believe these characters can survive, nay flourish in an adult setting with more mature themes and storylines. But not like this. This cynical, awkward, and unfunny teen romance borrowing the skin of TV's most beloved and recognizable mystery solvers and literally killing their dog. I gave the show a chance, unlike most people, after its first few episodes were unanimously and appropriately bashed. But I see now that was a mistake. For now, if I want my fix on a mature Scooby-Doo show, Mystery Incorporated has my back. Despite appealing to kids as well as adults, it's 100 times more mature than Velma is and deserves your time. There's not much else I can say here. I watched every episode of Velma, and it sucked. Goodbye.